Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.
From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Okay, now it's your turn. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, yoga. Here to talk more about it are Susie Amendola, certified yoga therapist, and next to her, Deb Welk. Deb is a retired registered nurse and a yoga teacher. Welcome to the two of you, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
You bet. Susie, I want to start with you. How do you define yoga?
I love when people ask me that question because it's sort of like asking, what's the nature of the universe? So I'm always kind of like set back because I really feel like yoga has a lot of different definitions for different people. And it really is the experience of yoga defines it. So when people start to experience and practice, they develop their own definition for what yoga is. And really at its core, yoga is a path to self-realization, to self-transformation, and to self-awareness. And there are a lot of practices that are involved in yoga. There's about 8 practices that are laid out in the tradition of yoga. The first 2 have to do with ethics. And they're the kind of ethics that are really about how do I respond to the world and how do I respond to myself? How do I act in the world and how do I act with myself? And is it in my own best interest? And so those ethics are sort of the foundation for yoga, and then comes the postures. And the postures are what kind of everybody is doing now. What we see everywhere is these yoga postures. And yoga postures are really a way of listening to yourself, a way of paying attention and embodying your awareness. There's an old saying in alternative medicine, and they say, disease knocks 3 times, and if you don't listen, it takes you. And so postures are a way to listen. They help you listen to your own body. So those are the first 3 rungs, and then there's a practice of breathing, and there's practice of relaxation, there's practices of meditation, and then the final goal is really self-realization and understanding yourself, and that's really done through the practice of meditation.
Wow, and there is quite a history to yoga from what I understand. Take us back a little bit and give us a brief history.
A brief history. Well, you know, it's about 5,000 years old, but I'll take you right up to present time, which is, you know, it's a tradition that's from India. It has its roots in India, and it's one of the 6 systems of Indian philosophy. So it's not considered a religious practice, but it's a practice, a philosophical practice, and this particular philosophy is one of practice. So, and it came to the States in about 1890. There was a great sage named Vivekananda who came to Chicago, and he was speaking at the World Parliament of Religions. And when he spoke about yoga, he brought tears to people's eyes. And to this day, they have a street named after him, and it's the street that the Art Institute of Chicago sits on. It's called Swami Vivekananda Way, and it's in honor of him and his bringing yoga to this country. So that's a very beautiful sort of story. And then again in 1920, a teacher named Paramahansa Yogananda came and started the Self-Realization Fellowship in Los Angeles. And to this day, there's still a beautiful lake shrine in Malibu where you can go. It's a beautiful piece of property on the ocean where you can go and study yoga and understand yoga. And then in the 60s, there was another kind of revival in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of teachers, one of my teachers, came to the States to bring the practices of yoga and to help people. And his particular slant on yoga was biofeedback, and his helping scientists and doctors understand how some of these practices can be really helpful for reducing stress. So that kind of brings us up to present day, and really now in modern times, the piece that's really been focused on in this country is the asana practice, or the postures. And so we see a lot of different schools of yoga that are doing postures. And so in some cases the meditation has kind of gone to the wayside, but it's showing a little resurgence because it's got a lot of benefit for people in the realm of health and wellness.
Interesting. We have photos and we want to put these up for our viewers. And Susie, as you look at these photos, tell us what comes to mind in terms of the yoga that you're talking about.
Okay, great. Well, this is actually the mountain pose, and this is just a beginning yoga posture that people stand in, and it's about bringing together the energy of heaven and earth in one stance. So as you stand, you root and ground and think about your connection to both the earth and the airspace above you. This is called triangle pose, and just looks like a triangle. Very good for lateral stretching and embodying your awareness around pelvic stability and pelvic flexibility. This is called the tree pose. This is kind of a favorite, and this is one that you see a lot in children's yoga too, because little kids love poses that they can, emulate something in nature. Very nice grounding pose. This is called the warrior pose. Takes a little more strength and also some flexibility. Another warrior pose, different kind of warrior. Energy moving out from the heart and expansive. This is one we see a lot now. It's called downward facing dog pose. And a lot of people have dogs that do this pose regularly, and a lot better than we do it. But it's a really beautiful pose for stretching the shoulders and the hamstrings. And this is a plank pose, really a stabilizing pose. This is called bridge. This is for spinal flexibility and pelvic flexibility. And forward bend. This pose is really about surrendering and letting go and relaxing hamstrings and heart and nervous system. Really beautiful pose. And this is called child's pose. And we call it the deep bow, sort of a pose of humility. It's a warming pose. It's a great pose on a cold winter day. Kind of warms you up quickly.
Wow. We're not going to do that on the set here.
No.
Just rest assured. So posture, very, very important component. But there are also other things, especially for our viewers today, that may be important to know, because some folks may look at those photos and think, "Are you nuts? I am not. That is not me."
Yeah.
Or that's not what I thought yoga was supposed to be. So transformative effects. You had brought up. So talk about that.
Yeah, there's so much to say about that, really. There's a lot of different ways to do postures, and postures really mean how you interact with the pose. And so not everybody has the same physical ability, physical capability, and so all the poses look differently on every person. So they're not meant to be Simon Says. They're meant to be incorporated in a way that suits each individual person. And so there's a lot of different kinds of practices that suit different kinds of people. And I work as a yoga therapist, and I work with heart patients, and I've done that for about 25 years. I work in the hospitals, and I train yoga teachers to work with heart patients in a program called the Ornish Program for Reversing Heart Disease Without Drugs or Surgery. And that program, it's an Ornish lifestyle medicine program. And really a big part of that is stress management, and it's also working with poses in a very different way that helps to downregulate the nervous system. So those kinds of practices may be things like breathing and relaxation and meditation and imagery, and the postures become sort of secondary and maybe backseat to some of those internal practices that take us inward and help us relax and deeply connect to ourselves.
Very interesting. Thank you. Deb, I have to ask, how did you get involved in all of this?
Well, it's a really good question, Kathy. I believe if I went back into like the 1980s, I was interested in yoga, but life was going on. I didn't have time. I couldn't find my way there. And I was busy working, raising a family, and it just didn't happen. But working as a nurse, there's a lot of stress that's involved. We're big caregivers, and whether that's a caregiver at home or in the hospital or in a clinic, we're always giving to others. And sometimes that's at the sacrifice of our own bodies. And as I continued in my career, I came to a point in my life where I was really suffering some of the health effects of not taking care of myself. And as a caregiver, that's a common type of thing. So I had low back issues. I was even told that I needed to have a spinal fusion in the low back. And I've always been more of a conservative approach to treatment and just decided I'm going to find a way. So my way was to exercise, lose weight. But about 10 years later, I developed mono. And that was, I will just tell you, I was 56 years old. Now, who gets mono when they're 56 years old? Well, if you've pushed your body so far and you're working 12, 14, 16 hours a day, you're not sleeping, you're stressed, you're moving all the time and not taking care of yourself, your body tells you. So Susie referenced this earlier. And it took me a good 2 years to come out of the exhaustion that I experienced with the mono. And it was truly yoga that brought me through that. So I went for about 6 months, and I mean, by 10 o'clock in the morning, I was so exhausted. I just had to lay down. I had to limit my work, and no matter what I did, I would have heart palpitations. I was just exhausted. And it was probably in the fall that there were several people. So when things start happening and your massage therapist says, I think you really need to look at yoga. My life coach said, I think you need to look at yoga. And then another friend says, have you ever thought about yoga? And I had heard about yoga, and in my work at the hospital, the Ornish program had come into Emmanuel Medical Center, and that was back in the early 90s. So I had worked very closely with Dr. Rick Collins, who brought Dr. Dean Ornish in. And through that, I knew of Susie, but I'd never taken a yoga class. So this was about 15, 16 years later, I decided I'm going to go to a yoga class. So I went to a yoga class, and it was in the evening. I went in, and Susie greeted me, and I said I'd like to buy a 24-class pass. And she's like, well, that's nice, but this is your first one. I said, that's okay, because you see, as a nurse, that's what we do. We set our goals, and by gosh, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
So I've totally been on a journey, a transformative journey of learning how to take care of myself, to have respect for myself and compassion for myself, to open my heart, really to take care of who I am inside. And that took some doing. I've been doing yoga now for 12 years. It is absolutely a part of my life. Prior to my retirement, I was working at Emmanuel. I was the nurse executive responsible for assisted living, long-term care, independent living, and memory support, responsible for staffing, quality of care, medication administration, and it was a huge job. If it were not for my yoga, there's no way that I could have stayed in that job, because I was able to be present at the time with what I was doing and let a lot of the extraneous things that prior to yoga would just dominate my life. Yeah. And I'd have high anxiety. And through my yoga, I was more grounded.
Yeah.
And my mantra became, yoga helps me to approach life with clarity, focus, ease, and grace.
Beautifully said. I want to back up though, knowing what you have described here. I guess as with everything else, there's a first impression to something. So you're on the run, you're trying to do 10 million things all at once, you're being introduced to yoga. I mean, Deb, do you just turn the corner and say, wow, this is the greatest thing, I wish I'd found it sooner? Or is it like so much else in our lives where we have to kind of ease into it and almost turn a corner,
right,
for lack of a better term? What was that for you?
So it was really developing, taking that discipline practice I have in my life and say, okay, you're going to practice yoga every week. And Susie would talk about a home practice. I'm like, yeah, well, I don't have time for that. And it was opening my mind, because I really didn't know what yoga was. I thought very much it's postures. There's so much more. There's so much more. It's just learning how to breathe and unwind your nervous system.
Interesting. And you got so far into this. You're a teacher.
Right.
So,
right.
What's it like to teach yoga?
In my retirement, it fills my heart.
Oh.
So I teach at Yoga Now in Benson, and Susie's the founder. That studio is the oldest studio in town since 1983. And so I got started there, and it was a safe place. I had to take the teacher training course, and honestly, when I took the teacher training, I really wasn't thinking about being a teacher. It was, you know, why don't I do this? I want to deepen and understand more about yoga, because I learned the asanas, and I learn a lot through what Susie shares in class. But I wanted to really know and understand yoga and the different facets of yoga. So taking the course, it was really interesting because the course is 200 hours, covers 9 months. It starts on a Friday night from 6 to 9:30, and then all day Saturday and all day Sunday. So here I am, power-packed, trying to answer emails all night, all long, trying to get things organized at work, and I have to shut down. So I go into class on Friday night, and I'm like this. And we're doing exercises and talking to people, and I'm like, how am I ever going to do this? Because I'm still so tightly wound. By the time I got to Sunday, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I wish I could feel like this all the time. And I was thinking about retirement, hadn't really made any plans, but I just got to thinking, what would it be like if life was like this all the time?
So you have to buy into something, obviously, if you're going to teach it, right? So your students, what are your students like?
So I love opening the heart of yoga to individuals who think they can't do yoga. So I teach a class on Saturday mornings called Beginner Yoga 50 Plus. So, and you don't have to be 50. You can come if you're younger than 50.
Really?
But yeah, absolutely. But it's really just making a real safe place for individuals who might be intimidated by younger people in the class. Now, for me, I love the younger people in the class. They keep me young. And I have so many dear friends that I have made through my work at Yoga Now and through the yoga teacher training. So just really bringing people into yoga. I extend that out to the Nebraska Nurses Association. So this past fall, I taught 2 classes at their convention. Now it was at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, God.
But that's what nurses do. They push. They can't make time for it any other time. But I'm getting some following with nurses who are now coming into the yoga class. And then I also teach down at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in the Center for Healthy Living. So there's staff, there's faculty, there's students there who come into the class. And it warms my heart to be able to see their openness to unwind and just stop everything and breathe. And move into relaxation ultimately.
I have to imagine, based on what you're describing, I've not ever done yoga, environment has to play into this. Susie, when you were putting your studio together, what do you need to be thinking about in terms of that space that's going to play well in the sandbox with all these wonderful things that you've been describing?
Yeah, the space is really, we have to create kind of a calm space. And you know, we're right in Benson on a busy street, and you can hear all the street noise. So we had to build extra walls, but we like a natural setting. So we've got natural brick in our space and wood floors and big windows and bright colors. And it's just a very warm and inviting environment for people.
Okay, and is that typical? I mean, are we going to find that in many of the setups? Or
I think when you look at yoga studios, they build them in that way, thinking about those things. When you look at yoga in a gym, it's a very different environment, or yoga in a hospital, or in a university. But now people are getting the sense that the space is important and it matters. And a lot of people come to us. They don't. It used to be they want us to come to them, and then they found out, oh, it's really nice coming to you. It takes me out of my environment and brings me in to a place that's really dedicated for this kind of a practice.
Okay, and yoga kind of the up and coming, it sounds like. So how do people, if we have viewers watching, or maybe they know of somebody who would be interested, it goes down to everything else. How do you know which place to pick, and most importantly, your instructor? How do you know that it's going to work? Because that teacher is so much a part of what's going on. So what advice would you have to folks there?
I love that you said that, Kathy, because I think the teacher-student relationship is really important. And you could be a wonderful teacher, but if you don't have that rapport with your students, it's not going to be the same experience. So I really think it does take a little bit of trying out. So I often say to people, just go date a studio for a while. Go, you don't have to marry it, but you can just go date it for a while. Go and just try it out and see how you get along. See what you feel in the environment. See what you feel about the class. See if you have a connection to the teacher. And I think that's really the best advice. And if you don't want to go, you can look online. People have their studios, pictures of their studios posted, and you can get a feeling sometimes just through what you see on the internet. So you can kind of look through some of the different studios. There's a lot here in Omaha. Yoga Now is just one of them, and we are an old studio, but there are lots of really wonderful studios in the city right now.
We've talked a lot about the teaching component, but you're a yoga therapist. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, that's a really, you know, it means, well, one thing that it means is that mine is a grandfathering of being a yoga therapist. I've spent 25 years working in a hospital setting with people with heart disease. And doing yoga therapy, you know, all yoga is therapeutic, but this is sort of an extended view of how yoga can interface with healing. And so there might be a yoga therapist that really focuses on working with children. There might be a yoga therapist that focuses on working with people with cancer. There might be somebody that does heart disease. There might be someone that works with backs and back issues. And so it's really sort of an intensive study. The usual yoga therapy program is about 800 to 1,000 hours, and it's usually, it requires a lot of in-service as well. So it's something that's a commitment. It means that you're really committed to the practice. But I do think that yoga in general is therapeutic. So I know that I'm probably there might be one other yoga therapist in the state of Nebraska. I'm probably the only one right now. But most yoga teachers have a therapeutic presence. And I think that that's what you want to look for when you're looking for yoga teachers, is that kind of therapeutic presence.
Okay, so we have people who are on board with the thought of maybe trying this. So they find the studio, they find the instructor. What can they expect, especially at the beginning? Because that tends to be the time, obviously, people drop off. It's not what they thought, or it's too difficult, or it's... Talk about those beginning stages for your not typical, nobody's typical, but just for that student coming in. Well,
I think that one thing to keep in mind is that yoga isn't exercise. So you don't want to approach it in the same way that you would an exercise routine, that it's really not about getting the poses perfect. So most of the practices here in yoga in Omaha are practices of postures, but there are some studios where you can go and practice meditation. There's some places where you can practice relaxation and just focus in those ways. So for people when they're starting out, I think that they need to really be gentle with themselves and see, is this for me? Does this work for me? And oftentimes people will think, well, I don't like this, so it's not for me. But there are a lot of different kinds of yoga. So I encourage people to try a few different styles and types of yoga so that they can find something that really works for them.
Change is difficult for so many of us. And so I was thinking about Deb's story. Somebody comes into this class and they're fine with who they are. They like their personality, they like the way that they've been, and they go into this class. Maybe they're a little high strung. They're somewhat okay with that. How do you, ladies, I mean, in just the minutes we have remaining, how do they transition successfully from being this high strung, I don't have time for any of that? I mean, I would think that takes some patience that you're going to have to try to talk about that a little bit, because that's a pretty big difference for what you're trying to accomplish. To take someone from a certain place to this place, there's got to be some transitions involved with that.
Yeah, there really are, and I'm going to let you say a little bit too about that. But I think that, you know, patience is a part of it, but the practices themselves actually serve to allow us to become more patient. So just doing the practices, you actually are practicing patience. So it kind of is built in. So as you do it and you leave, most people leave classes feeling exuberant or relaxed or peaceful or joyful. So that in and of itself gives a little incentive to keep coming back. So that helps with the transition.
Well, I was going to say, you were talking about your studio in Benson. So you get done with all this relaxation and then you go out to a busy street. There's got to be just some transition time in there where you have to kind of get used to that, and eventually, I suppose, like anything else, adapt to it, correct? Final thoughts, Deb?
And I think along with that, there's friendships that are built. So that's usually that buffer, is checking in with each other. And so it creates this whole community that's so beautiful. So I'll just share the class I taught this morning. It was the first one I've done with medical students, fourth-year medical students. And as they came in, it's part of a course that they're taking. And I follow the basic coursework that I learned in class. And so it started with a centering practice, which is just really making a time of transition from all the busyness of the day. And as healthcare, we're thinking, processing, doing, and it's moving us into being. And then the asanas, and then cool downs, and then moving into final relaxation. And it was just amazing to see these individuals really unwinding.
Very well said. All right, I want, for those people who are very interested, even if you're not, I think this is fascinating. I want to go to websites, and I want to kind of walk through those websites with folks. There are many, many different ways you can learn more about this. We have doyoganow.com. That's yours, right,
That's
Susie?
ours.
Right? And then pronounce this.
Kripalu.org.
Kripalu.org, and then yogainternational.com, and then Himalayan Institute.org. Susie, Deb, thank you so much for being here today and for inspiring and encouraging us to branch out, try something new, and who knows, maybe we'll enhance our lives in the process, right? Thank you very much for being here. Best
you.
wishes to both of you.
Thank
And
you,
thanks to our
Kathy.
students for working so hard behind the scenes. Of course, to our viewers for watching. As we close, a look at a wintry Elmwood Park as seen through the lens of Zach Swoboda, a senior right here at UNL. We will see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/Consider This. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.